recording now. And I think we can...
Hola, Ari, buen día.
Buen día, good morning. Yes, welcome everybody, 116 participants. I will ask everybody to please mute their microphones while they're not speaking. We're gonna start now after these small activities. Thank you again. It's really fascinating to see all the works coming up. Barriers, people, evidence, intervention, psychology, and nudge and evidence are the ones more recurrent words. So thank you so much. I think we're gonna start now with the session. Just to say that in terms, and again, welcome, and this is part of the UN Behavioral Science Week in the UN 2022 edition, and I will share the link of the program now so you can learn more about it if you don't know. And just to say, so this session, many of the goals of our organizations are largely and ultimately depending on behaviors that humans decide to take or not to take, be it from speaking up about your opinion, your needs, claiming your rights, saving money, deciding on a career or study choice, registering to vote, deciding to run for election, intervening when you witness an act of discrimination or violence, etc. So there's many small, whereas of course reality is very complex, but at the end these changes in behaviors can make a long way in the final development outcomes on the work that we do. So here we are in this session. We would like to perhaps take a deep dive into the connections between those behaviors and the work that we do in the area of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. And for that, we will have the pleasure to hear from Professor Cristina Bicchieri from the University of Pennsylvania, and also from 4 colleagues from UN Women who will tell us in practice what their work is and has been in this area of work. Again, at the end, we will have some space and time for questions and answers from discussion. And again, this will be recorded, is being recorded, and we will share the PowerPoint and the recording. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Cristina Bicchieri. She is the SJP Carvey Chair of Social Thought and Comparative Ethics and Professor of Philosophy and Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. She's also, among many other things, she's the director of the Master of Behavioral Decision Science and the Center of Social Norms and Behavioral Dynamics. Welcome, Professor. I cannot see you right now on the screen, but we ask you can put yourself on camera if you can. Yeah, so it's a pleasure to welcome you and to this session, and we'd like to ask if you can tell us a little bit about the role that behavioral science play in changing or bypassing social norms that negatively impact women and girls. Professor, I cannot see you. We cannot hear you. Are you? Yeah, you are here. I can see you are connected. Let's see. But we cannot hear or see you. At least I can't. Seems to have some technical issues. Oh, here you are. We can see, we cannot see you, but you appear as if your camera is on, but it's black, but we cannot hear you, Professor. Perhaps if you want to restart, apparently it cannot appear on video or be heard. Perhaps you can reconnect, try to restart or reconnect. Okay, yes, Professor is saying she will restart. So sorry, apologies colleagues for this technical glitch. Of course, it had to happen, but no problem. We'll have a lot of interesting conversations in the meantime. I see many colleagues keep joining, so at least that's good. Okay, she's connecting again. Let's see if it works now. Hi, Professor. We see you are connected. Let's see if we can hear you. I see you are muted. Let's, while we solve these problems, why don't we jump into the second part of the panelists. I will ask colleagues from UN Women. So we wanted to kind of provide first an introduction on the concepts and the connection between gender and behavior and social norms by the professor, and then go into the practice. But let's switch it, let's revert the order. And I will ask colleagues from UN Women to jump right in and take us through the work that they've been doing in applying behavioral science in their work in practice. So please, colleague, go ahead. I think I will ask Irma Mulatic to start to tell us about the experience in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Please go ahead, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I really do hope that Professor Bicchieri's connection will improve and we'll get to hear some of the inputs from her and that will set the tone for this discussion. So first of all, good morning and hello, good afternoon to all the colleagues that joined us. My name is Irma Mulabdic. I work with the UN Women office in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And today I'm gonna take you quickly through an intervention that we sort of designed and delivered in Bosnia and Herzegovina that was behaviorally informed for combating domestic violence. So if I can just ask, yes, there we go, for the slide. We have very little time to go into details, so I'm just gonna go straight into the topic. This intervention is not by far a single standing intervention. It's part of a larger portfolio the UN Women in Bosnia and Herzegovina has on ending violence against women, and it's part of a regional program on ending violence against women funded by the European Union and implemented by UN Women in cooperation with civil society organizations. Hence, this intervention was also implemented with one of our partners from the civil society sector, Vivergen Tuzla. So this intervention was designed with a methodology called Communications for Behavioral Impact. And it was focused on one area or one region in Bosnia, which is called Tuzla Canton. So it's like an administrative region. It's home to around 500,000 people. And according to the data obtained in 2019 from the Ministry of Interior of this canton, in only 20% of reported cases of domestic violence, a protection order was requested and issued. Now, a protection order can include eviction from home, restraining order, mandatory psychosocial treatment, anti-harassment and stalking order, substance abuse rehabilitation, and temporary custody. And these are defined by the law on protection from domestic violence. Police officers are mandated by this law, to request some of these measures. There can be more than one per reported case, and the court is mandated to confirm and issue this order. So the targeted behavior that we identified together with our partners was that we want police officers in Tuzla Canton working on domestic violence to request protection orders every time they register a domestic violence case. So not every fifth time, but every time. Before an intervention was designed, a market research, so to say, was conducted that showed that police officers are faced with a multitude of barriers when requesting protection orders, so barriers to the desired behavior. And those included procedural, something like short deadlines, victim withdrawal from testifying, and then an unclear assessment of the Domestic Violence Act, whether it's a criminal or misdemeanor. Then sociocultural, very much connected to social norms that produce a lot of prejudices that were identified among the police force in this area. And then institutional barriers, like organization of police work, lack of human capacities, and knowledge about how adequately to respond to domestic violence cases. And in order to address these issues and these barriers to the desired behavior, interventions were designed that included institutional collaboration with the Ministry of Interior. This was done through our partner, Behaviourally. And then community mobilization. There was a lot of on-site outreach that was done together with the police officers and students of like psychology and social work. And then a very intense public campaign with concrete key messages. So the intervention took a span over a year. And was targeted around these three areas. So some of the findings that we kind of captured through evaluation of the intervention that happened after the 1 year of implementation. Well, first of all, is that at the end of the intervention, the rate of requested protection orders against reported cases of domestic violence was first increased to around 60%, and then sort of at the mid 2021 year, and then when we received the data for the entire 2021 year from the Ministry of Interior, we saw an increase of 93%, which sort of proved to the impact of the intervention beyond the completion of the project as well. And then another result was that for the first time, let's say in history, because it's unknown that this has happened before, Ministry of Interior launches on their own initiative an internal investigation into gaps in response to domestic violence cases. And in order to facilitate the knowledge and the procedure of requesting a protection order, guidelines were developed to standardize this police response in this area. And then intervention engaged around 1,600 police officers, 30 student volunteers, and over 900 citizens through door-to-door activities, this on-site outreach. If I can ask the colleague who's screening to just scroll down so we can touch upon the benefits of using BI. Thank you. So after this, just not to the next slide, but just scroll down to the same slide, or if it's not visible, it's fine. So the benefits of using behavioral insights or behavioral science. So you might ask after this short presentation, where is the behavioral science here? Well, in our experience, just by focusing on one specific behavioral objective allowed us to have a much bigger impact than, for instance, in situations where, we had to disperse our human and financial resources on various capacity building or awareness raising activities with multiple sectors, and then in many locations that did not produce this kind of impact. And then the other part is clear measurement of the impact was really essential, because we had a very clear baseline, and then we were able to measure our impact when the project ended, and some months after the project was completed, where we could see the impact even beyond that implementation time. And moreover, it was helpful to use domestic violence administrative data for these purposes, given to us by the Ministry of Interior. And then lastly, I'm just going to say that, you know, talking about behavioral science and which kind of, let's say, approaches we could identify in this intervention, I would say that, let's say, social influence and then power of purpose are some of the drivers of decision making. So for instance, by engaging 1,600 police officers, so practically the whole force of this area, we managed to create a lot of peer pressure to change the dominant behavior. And then with careful messaging, such as request a protection order, save a family, we really reminded the police officers of their purpose and oath to protect citizens from harm. This is it from my side, and please, I'm open to any questions and comments after the presentations at the question and answer session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Irma, for the presentation. And we'll pass on to the next colleague who will present the project from Uruguay, and we'll focus on the targeted behaviors and the results of the intervention. Please go ahead, Mariana Mosca.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the session. So as Sara said, I work with the UN Women Office in Uruguay. And well, yeah, our project was based around the use of parental leave by men. We worked in an interinstitutional and interdisciplinary team with members from the Social Security Bank, the BPS, certainly members from UN Women, members from the Department of Economics of the Faculty of Social Sciences of the University of the Republic, and members of the World Bank, both from the Mind, Behavior and Development Unit and from the Poverty and Equity Global Practice. Since 2013, private sector workers in Uruguay have the right to request a subsidy for newborn care, the part-time leave, which allows them to reduce their working hours by half while receiving their salary in full. This starts when the maternity leave ends and can go until the baby turns 6 months old. So fathers and mothers can share the subsidy by alternating days, weeks, or months. However, very few men take part-time leave, and this is our problem. Actually, administrative data for 2021 shows that only 2% of the total beneficiaries of the part-time leave program were men, only 2%, which is very, very low. And this is impeding progress towards the objective for which this subsidy was created in the first place, which is to promote the involvement of fathers in raising their children and to help to close gender gaps in employment trajectories after motherhood. So this is precisely the behavior we wanted to target through our intervention, men's limited use of part-time leave. So this involved addressing identified barriers, not only for men, but also for women. So we first developed a process map based on a review of documentation and on literature on the subsidy and insights from a survey that was carried out in 2018. We used this map to carry out semi-structured interviews for mothers and fathers who had taken the part-time leave, and also for those who, well, a group that hadn't. And through this diagnostic exercise, we identified key barriers that were common to both men and women. In terms of information, it was clear that there was a lack of knowledge, in particular about how can they request the subsidy and about the possibility of alternating the use. In terms of social norms and how they prevented or they prevent men from being seen as caregivers. And in terms of the predominant belief that mothers play a more important role in taking care of young babies. So now moving into our intervention design. The intervention consisted of a message campaign, SMS and email messages for both men and women, and they were sent in September 2021. These were behaviorally informed messages that targeted the barriers I mentioned before. We designed 2 experiments. The first one, in which we sent an informative message to a random sample of eligible beneficiaries of the BPS in an age group between 18 and 41 years old, reproductive age. These to evaluate the effect of this informative message. So we had a control group with which we could later compare. And in our second experiment, we sent messages to a random sample of men and women who applied for maternity and paternity leave. And this was intended to compare the effect of different messages. One message that was the same informative message we sent in the first experiment, a second message that contained a testimony from a father who used the subsidy, and a third message that highlighted the importance of planning ahead with one's partner and discussing alternation of the subsidy. Messages were sent to almost 15,000 people. And we also designed a brochure with additional, more detailed information on part-time leave. And we added a link to this brochure on each of the messages sent. In terms of the results, for the short-term effect of the results, a survey was conducted in order to assess changes in perceptions, changes in the intention of use of part-time leave, and the different effects of each of the messages. Almost 2,500 surveys were carried out in a representative sample of project participants. And in experiment 1, we found that the information message did increase knowledge among men. So those who received the message were more likely to know that they could request the subsidy compared to the control group. In experiment 2, we found that the planning ahead message, which not only highlighted alternation, but also mentioned breastfeeding, which is an important thing to say. This seems to have had like a mixed effect in terms of beliefs, in terms of whether participants believe that both parents should take care of the newborn. And this points to the need to provide additional information on how fathers can engage with breastfeeding when they are in charge of taking care of the newborn. And thirdly, also in the second experiment, we found that the testimony message had a positive impact in intended use of the subsidy. This message was associated with a higher probability that men would say they are willing to use the part-time leave relative to the planning ahead message. Administrative data will be analyzed in the coming months to evaluate changes in actual use of the license. So hopefully we'll have some interesting results to share with you in a working paper we're preparing. So we'll definitely let you know once this is ready. And finally, moving on to the benefits of using BI. Yeah, definitely one thing is the low cost of interventions such as this one. Sending out these messages had a very low cost, but it was very cost effective because we literally sent one message one time to all these people, and we were able to measure a change, a small change, but there was a change. So there's potential for this pilot to be scaled up. And the second benefit is the potential of this type of interventions to generate quantifiable change. And I highlight the word quantifiable because evidence is absolutely essential in order to encourage more people, both within this institution, the state institution, the BPS, but also in other state institutions, to use behavioral science as the versatile and context sensitive to to inform policymaking that it is. So yeah, I would say that these are the two main benefits. So back to you, Sarah. And obviously you can make all the questions you want in the Q&A part of the session.
Thank you so much, Mariana. This is very interesting, another very interesting example and very different from the first one, but really shows the range of possibilities that where behavioral science can be used in the programming of gender equality. We're now traveling to Kyrgyzstan, where our colleague Dildora will be talking about the participation and the work with women living with HIV. And yeah, the previous slide, please. And Dildora, if you want to come in, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah. Dear colleagues, dear distinguished guests of today's session, warm greetings to everyone. My name is Dildora Hamidova, and I'm working for Young Women in Kyrgyz Republic. And I'm very excited to share our experience, our work, what we are doing here. Before going through my presentation, I would like to give a brief introduction of what is happening in my country. Kyrgyzstan is actually a small mountainous country in the heart of Central Asia. And like in many low and middle income countries, girls and women living with HIV face discrimination at various levels, including political, social, economic, and other aspects. They are culturally, socially, and economically more vulnerable than men. Actually, the lack of data, reliable data, misconceptions about HIV transmission, roads, stigma, and discrimination on the part of the society lead to the fact that women living with HIV face many challenges, including social, psychological, and spiritual. And basically, women living in the conditions of so-called traditional culture, like male-dominated Kyrgyzstan, are in a more difficult situation. The government officials often do not engage women in decision-making processes, despite the existence of the challenges in HIV area. Many local authorities and decision-makers seriously remain ill-informed about the issues and challenges that women living with HIV face in Kyrgyzstan. And unfortunately, they are reluctant to engage in new transformative interventions that involve women living with HIV. But I'm not talking that much about this today. I'm going to present the work that we are doing to support girls and women living with HIV. The project we are implementing is about promoting innovations in HIV area, where we provide a platform for women living with HIV to speak up. UN Women Kyrgyzstan country office has been promoting positive deviance model during the last 2 years, which has enabled community champions to be identified among the key populations groups and people living with HIV/AIDS, invest resources, build their capacity, develop their skills in how to organize and promote peer-to-peer support through their success stories as a positive agents of change. Actually, positive deviance is an approach which helped to identify positive behaviors, social change based on the people with unusual but successful behaviors that enable them to solve a particular problem better than their peers or any community members, and identify the positive behaviors, social change, as well as invest in specific resources to inspire them to develop the necessary skills, empower them to share the knowledge gained for change and advocacy among their peers. And this is to say that we are still in testing and experimenting mode of this approach. And so far what we have learned that there is a higher level of stigma and discrimination, not only among the women living with HIV and different key populations groups, but overall general public, as HIV talking in Kyrgyzstan remains highly stigmatized within the patriarchal and closed conservative communities in my country. And working with the girls and women living with HIV, we identified high level of self-stigma, and because this is the main cause that women are not seeking the services related to their health, or they're not actually promoting, that they're not actually asking or promoting for their rights. They are not advocating, and most of the time, unfortunately, they lack specific knowledge base of how to find a solution to get access to HIV services, sexual and reproductive health services, and support other community members. And talking about the targeted behavior, what we found out, the results, what we showed through introduction of to positive deviance approach, that using different methods, different interventions, like storytelling, like user journey, or empowering communities, giving them updated information about HIV or access to health services, that they are that they are accessible, affordable, and available, and to gain greater access to treatment, care, and support. And actually, within our project, we tried to overcome self-stigma and help girls and women living with HIV, that they can always openly say about their life living with HIV. They can fight and combat their fears to seek for more services related to HIV, advocate for gender visibility within HIV programs, and push more towards decision-making in HIV field. And finding these behaviors, we tried to introduce different interventions. And as I already mentioned, we had user journey tools, and we had different communications tools, and we tried to put advocacy. We talked about gender equality, we talked about tolerance, non-discrimination principles, and we gave them more information how to advocate for their rights. And well, basically using different interventions, the results, what we have now, are the first ever that 9 girls and women living with HIV can openly say about their HIV status. And for the last 2 years, around 665 girls and women living with HIV, representing different key populations groups like drug users, sex workers, or representatives of LGBTQI community, participated in our different trainings with our partners to overcome stigma and discrimination and support their community members. And for the first time ever, girls and women, especially from ethnic minorities and from religious backgrounds in Kyrgyzstan, started to seek for more services related to their sexual and reproductive health. And for the first time ever, all around the country, within the support of our partners, we put gender agenda in HIV programming. We discussed the gender dimensions within HIV services, and we tried to open a platform, organized different networking initiatives that women living with HIV talk about the gender responsive and socially inclusive aspects of in HIV field. And just to finish my presentation, I would like to say a final remark that what we learned by introducing and using the targeted intervention, focusing on social and behavior change through different role models, community champions will not only overcome barriers related to stigma, self-stigma, and discrimination, but also overcome HIV epidemic, not only in Kyrgyzstan, but across Central Asia. And talking about the benefits of using behavior change, we actually did interventions differently, allowing to make the process to be more inclusive, providing spaces for new actors and left behind groups, genuine participation in HIV processes. And what is remarkable here, we used the human-centric approach and the human rights-based approach, leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tildora, for this great explanation and double appreciation, because I know it's very late for you in Kyrgyzstan. So thank you so much for being at this time of day with everyone. I just want, before we move to our last speaker from UN Women, I want to quickly do a check with Professor Bicchieri to see if we can hear her.
Can you hear me?
Yes, okay, we can hear you.
That's
Okay.
great. I am on the phone. For some reason, the computer, is not working. Zoom is not working on the video and voice. I don't know why. I am in a very remote place. Maybe it's too much for the computer. I don't know.
Okay, we're very, very happy to hear you. So let's finish, if you don't mind, Professor, with the fourth presentation from UN Women, and then we'll hand it over to you for some quick remarks before we have some time for the Q&As. So hand it over now to Leah, who will talk about the experience in Latin America.
Thank you, Sara. I'm also very anxious, so I'll try to respect my 5 minutes, and so we can listen to the professor. So thank you. As you have been hearing, UN Women seeks to create, use, and disseminate innovative tools that support the prevention of violence against women and girls. And this is the reason why the Regional Office for the Americas and the Caribbean, together with the Behavioral Insights team, has set up a couple of years ago to first develop a qualitative study with the aim of identifying opportunities to apply behavioral science to engage men in Latin America and the Caribbean in the prevention of violence against women and girls. And based on the key lessons, we also designed and developed a model campaign to engage bystanders in the prevention of online violence against women and girls. And this is the model I'm going to present today. So basically, the problem and behavioral that we targeted was, as I said before, online violence against women and girls. So together with BIT, we developed and tested behavioral-informed messages to encourage men to intervene when witnessing digital violence. So first, we ran 26 interviews with violence prevention experts and men who had taken part in different programming aimed to prevent violence against women and girls. And we identified different barriers that hinder bystanders from intervening against violence. For example, bystanders did not recognize violence against women. Bystanders thought that others did not take action when witnessing violence against women. And also bystanders worried about the consequences of taking action while overlooking the results of their own inaction. Lastly, bystanders did not know how to intervene effectively before the situation. So as I said before, we used an online, or you can see it on the slide, we used an online survey platform to simulate 3 different scenarios illustrating different forms of digital violence. We recruited over 5,000 men from Bolivia and Guatemala and measured their likelihood of intervening in these different situations. So we showed them different, as I said, different kinds of messages, and we evaluated their reaction. So 3 out of 4 messages increased their likelihood to intervene to stop perpetrators. The best performing message was what we call the rules of thumb that indicates what to do, explicitly what to do before violence, digital violence. Only half of the total respondents correctly identified instances of digital violence that were presented to them. And this was the case all across the different groups that were involved. And 3, this is also very important, 3 in 10 survey participants voluntarily exited the survey immediately after seeing digital violence against women and girls on the introduction page. And this clearly may signal that communication campaigns might not be able to engage some men effectively, and that other strategies are needed. So just to finish up with a couple of recommendations of lessons learned that we will be applying in the future. So clearly, as I was saying, the rules of thumb messaging has worked the best. So this is clearly a promising strategy. But we also identify some areas to target in future messaging and research that include: 1, improving identification of digital violence; 2, prompting men to support survivors and investigating how to mitigate the risk that interventions increasing bystanders' sense of self-efficacy lead them to project this onto women experiencing digital violence. And lastly, interventions such as communication campaigns that depend on men engaging with violence prevention content may not efficiently reach the most reluctant men. So we as UN Women, together with our partners, may need to implement more intensive and or personalized interventions and leverage different touch points or messages to engage this group. I hope I was clear. I was running through my presentation, and I can hand it over to the professor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. This is really another very interesting presentation. And the issue of bystanders of violence is one of the areas where we've seen more interventions in UN Women, where behavioral science can play a key role. Without further ado, Professor Bicchieri, it's over to you to make some final remarks, and I hope that we can have some time for Q&As for a few minutes at the end. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Excellent. I sent you some slides that you may share. And
I will share them
again,
with participants.
Okay, and I need to know, okay, how, if you have them and you can show them so other people can get them, which is important for some reason.
Okay, so you want to share them now? Okay, so I'll share my screen.
Yeah, share your
Just
screen.
To say, yeah.
That's wonderful.
Oh, okay, I will share my
That's
screen.
wonderful. So I can explain what I wanted to say.
Okay, can you see them?
Yeah, perfect. So you can go on. I basically wanted to discuss a type of intervention that we call norm nudging, which is very different from the typical intervention in which either small scale, because with nudging, you can scale up a lot because you send messages and information about what people in a relevant reference network do or approve or disapprove of. And this is very powerful in general. And so it's scalable and it's cheap because you don't use either economic or legal incentives. These doesn't mean they are not important, but certainly, this is much cheaper and it may be very, very useful. Now, what does this involve, norm nudging? Involve social influence, what we call social influence and social comparison, i.e. we provide information about what other people that matter to you approve or disapprove and what they do, okay? For example, you may communicate levels of gender violence. This is what's happening in Italy nowadays on newspaper. There's a lot of communication about violence, including killing. Next slide. Can you put the next slide? Thank you. So what are the mechanisms of nudging? Okay. The very important thing when you send these messages, this type of information, you have to be sure that the target behaviors are interdependent. This is very, very important, okay? I will show you a slide later on, but the main thing about interdependence, it means that people's behavior is conditional on what they expect other people to do and or approve or disapprove of. So it's conditional on expectation, and norm nudging is crucial. It's based on expectation, because with the social information you give people, you aim to produce or change expectations, okay? So you have to assume a necessary condition is that expectation have an influence on your behavior, on your preference, okay? And of course, expectations are what I call empirical, what other people do, or normative, what other people approve or disapprove of. It's also very important to tap into the good, relevant reference network, because if I tell you what's happening now to women in Bangladesh, you may say that's very interesting, but does not refer to what's happening to me now. Okay, next slide. I try to go on. We don't need this. Then you can share the slides with everybody. Now, to be effective, this type of nudging, this type of social influence must identify the mechanism through which different kind of information affect behavior. I can give you information about what people do. How does it affect behavior? About what people approve or disapprove. How does it affect behavior? What happens in the mind of people? And moreover, you have to understand the context in which the behavior occurs. Very important. Go on. Okay. So the most important thing you have to understand and measure, actually, I will talk a very little bit about measurement, but very little, is whether a behavior is independent or interdependent. What does it mean? When I was working on child marriage, for example, in India, I was totally convinced that it was a social norm. But people who work on it explained to me, no, it's not a social norm, it's a pure descriptive norm, and sometimes it's a sort of moral imperative, okay, that parents think the moral thing to do is, to protect the child from possible violence and so on and so forth. So when you measure this target behavior, you have to be really, really capable of deciding whether it's independent or interdependent, whether it's motivated by moral or custom, things, versus is motivated by what you believe other people do and approve or disapprove of. Very, very important. Let's go on another slide. No, this is basically what I'm saying. Let's look. Okay. Now, what you observe typically, think of women, violence against women, child marriage, various, gender issues. You may think, oh, this is a social norm, we have to work on that. Well, it depends. You have to measure and be able to say what it is. And the most important measurement part is not only you have basically to know what are people's expectations, you do surveys, is relatively easy. But another very important thing is crucial, the crucial thing to do is to be able to measure whether these expectations have a causal effect on behavior. This is absolutely crucial. So when you see collective behavior, almost everybody's behaving in the same way. You may think it's a social norm. It may not be a social norm at all. You look at expectation and you look at conditionality. Okay, let's go on.
Professor, just a small interruption that we have. I want to be cognizant we have 4 minutes left for the end of the session. So just if you could perhaps wrap up a little bit. I'm so sorry, because this is really so interesting and so fascinating. We will make sure that we'll share the PowerPoint presentation with all participants. I will share a link now where participants can enter their email addresses. Yeah, and so sorry about that, Professor, about all the technical issues. Just wanted to, unfortunately, we won't have time for Q&As, but hopefully this is just the beginning of a series of sessions that we can organize on this topic and on this project. So yeah, sorry about that.
All right, I would be very, very happy to respond. And if you want, you may send all the slides, basically. And so people can look at them. How much time do I have at this point?
3 minutes. 3 minutes till the end of the session. Yes.
Okay, so basically what I wanted to say, and you see on the slides, I tell you the slides so that you understand them. The diagnostic is very important. Part of the diagnostic is the measurement, okay? So let's say you are absolutely sure at this point that behavior is conditional on expectation, and you try to do nudging to change people's expectation. At the end of the slide, I have, basically 2 or 3 slides in which I show the difficulties that you may encounter when you send an empirical message, when you send a normative message, and I'm very happy to discuss with you these difficulties, basically, and the fact that nudging may backfire, may make the situation worse off, as when you tell people there is a lot of corruption or there's a lot of violence against women, you may normalize corruption, you may normalize violence. So what I want to say at the very end is give you a warning about, look, you do nudging, you try to give people information, normative or empirical, but pay attention, because this information may backfire, and I tell you why, basically, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for this. Again, I shared a link where you can please, everyone who's interested in getting the presentations and or knowing more about the projects that have been presented, please enter your email in that link. Again, the recording and the PowerPoints will also be available at the UN Innovation Network website that I also shared. We are 1 minute over, so unfortunately we won't have time for Q&As. I want to thank everybody for attending, and I wish a very fruitful and interesting week ahead, the UN Behavioral Science Week. I also shared the program link on the chat so you can see what's going on. There's very many interesting sessions happening. And with that, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for your patience with all the technical glitches. Wishing everyone a great rest of the day and the week.
Bye all.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, thank you.